Module 3, starting on page 31 of your manual, developing results-oriented plans. For the moment, we're going to start with the first learning objective, which is understanding that a community action agency plans for outcomes. So, why plan? Think about why planning is a part of the Roma cycle. So Jerry, if you don't mind to scribe for me here, and why would we plan?
You've got to achieve a result, so you got to start somewhere.
So, achievement of results.
Your plan gives you your end goals so you can then map out your path.
So, see, plan gives you your end goal. Helps
Map
you
out your plan.
Map out your plan. Map your path. I like that.
Target your funding.
Target funding. Any others? You could, let's see, the act of planning provides you with an opportunity for your agency or your community to step away from your day-to-day operations and consider a vision for the future. So you could consider your vision. It helps you to identify where you want to be in 3 to 5 years and not just go through what are we doing today. Where are we going to be in 3 to 5 years? Allows us to consider in a strategic and comprehensive way how our agency is going to address our anti-poverty mission. It allows us to remain competitive as a needs and community environment change. And a well thought out plan helps us to identify agency staff from all programs, board members, and a common vision. It pulls us together around a common vision and common outcomes. And the final one, it's required. We must plan. The 1998 CSBG reauthorization reinforces the necessity to plan. While we create a strategic plan is the right way for an organization to manage effectively and efficiently, it is also a legislative mandate that all agencies produce a community action plan, which includes needs assessments and also an assessment of our own agency resources. The purpose of the assessment and the plan is to identify the improvements or the results that we achieve. So on page 33, where do we start our planning activities? What comes first? You'll see a little graphic there. We got the grant. All right, now what are we going to do with it? That's not quite how this is supposed to work. Rather, we have to decide on each funding source and other resources and how it supports our mission. Does it fit into our mission? Does this funding, sometimes the right thing to do is to say no thanks to that fund, that funding source, because it doesn't support our mission. We have to focus on the results of our mission and consider how the agency resources support those outcomes we wish to achieve. So, what happens without a plan? Mission drift is one possibility, and it tells us to never subordinate our mission in order to get money. On page 34, what are our results? So Drucker tells us that the results of social sector organizations are measured outside the organization in changed lives and changed conditions. He says that we should look at both short-term accomplishments and long-term change. Drucker's question 4, what are our results? So, according to Drucker, in business, you can debate whether profit is really an adequate measuring stick. Do we do our job or not in a business world? However, if there is no profit, there is no business. You must turn a profit in the business world. In the social sector, there is no universal standard for success. Each organization or agency, we have to define, we have to identify our customers and honestly judge whether our lives are being changed. That's our measuring stick. Are we changing lives? Are they changing for the better? When these successes that we have there, when they're reported to the state office and the NASCAP, we can begin to understand that the common results being achieved across the whole country. Data that is considered during the planning phase of Roma cycle includes agency service data. We have to consider the results, or sometimes the lack of results from that we have achieved in previous years. So have we been successful? I need someone to read for me, if they don't mind. I am going to pull up a story here. Do I have a volunteer to read a short story?
Pretty sure Thomas just did.
I was going to say Bueller. Do you mind?
I don't care.
On page 51 here, right here where it says look at short-term accomplishments, just read that, just a couple short paragraphs.
The small mental health center was founded and directed by a dedicated husband and wife team, both psychotherapists. They called it a healing community, and in the 15 years they ran the organization, they achieved results others had dismissed as impossible. Their primary customers were people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and most came to the center following failure after failure in treatment. Their situation nearly hopeless. The people at the center said there is somewhere to turn. Their first measure was whether primary customers and their families were willing to try again. The staff had a number of ways to monitor progress. Did participants regularly attend group sessions and participate fully in daily routines? Did the incidence and length of psychiatric hospitalizations decrease? Could these individuals show new understanding of their disease by saying, I have had an episode, as opposed to citing demons in the closet as they progressed? Could participants set realistic goals for their own next steps? Continue on.
Is that the end of the story there?
It's here. One more paragraph.
Yeah, one more paragraph.
The center's mission was to enable people with serious and persistent mental health to recover. And after two or more years of intensive work, many could function in these worlds. They were no longer incurable. Some were able to return to a life with their family. Others could hold steady jobs. A few completed graduate school. Whether or not members of that healing community did recover, whether the lives of primary customers changed in this fundamental way, was the organization's single bottom line.
Thank you, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. So the essentials is the Mental Health Treatment Center, this one in particular, was able to define specific results that enabled them to identify customer progress. Customers, they weren't cured, but they were able to hold a job. Complete school, they were able to return home from an institution. They no longer blamed the demons in the closet. They had reduced number and length of psychiatric hospitalization. The treatment center clearly defined the results in terms they could measure. So, qualitative results, that's more intangible, therefore harder to measure, but still very important. Improved self-esteem, empowerment, or motivation may be considered qualitative. Improved quality of life is sometimes included as an outcome for some programs. Quantitative results are the counts of individuals who met the outcome that is defined by the standard, such as they secured a job, they kept it for 90 days, improved income. Those are quantitative results. I'm going to stop here for a minute. I just want to put a plug. I was pleasantly surprised when I read this book. I highly recommend anybody in our agency to read this. It's very informative, and to be honest, I really learned a lot and got a lot out of it. This one is called The 5 Most Important Questions You Will Ever Ask About Your Organization. This is the Peter Drucker book that we talk about frequently here with Drucker's 5 Questions. So picking up here on page 35, so we assess what must be strengthened or abandoned. To believe that whatever we do is a moral cause and should be pursued, whether there is success or not, is a perennial temptation for nonprofit executives and even more for their boards. Everything is a good cause, but we cannot afford to continue where we seem unable to further the mission. Do we produce results that are sufficiently outstanding for us to justify putting resources into this? Need alone does not justify continuing, nor does tradition. People don't like change, and we see that everywhere. However, we have to be careful to distinguish between programs and services that are not productive and should no longer be part of our range of services, and those that are essential but not currently producing the outstanding results that we want. If essential performance areas are weak, we must strengthen them. What results do we want to achieve? On page 36, we use the word results and the word outcomes interchangeably as we move through these various principles. Simply put, outcomes or results are changes observed or reported after participation. Find my flip chart here. I think that was from the way written. I may have jumped the gun. I'm sorry. So for the families, outcomes are changes in knowledge, attitude, skills, or ability or behavior. For the agencies and the communities, it may be things such as changes in the agency's public policy, organizational effectiveness, social health conditions. Community action agencies and CSBG eligible entities, whether they're private, nonprofit, community-based, or agencies of local government, produce outcomes for individuals, families, and their community and the agency itself. So let's talk about the types of outcomes. Outcomes happen over time, represent a change in the situation or status, maybe a change in direction for the family, the agency, or the community. Could be a change in status. What the residents of one public housing project, they may feel safe. Another one, they might feel that they're in crisis, depending upon location, neighbors, and other environmental factors. Some of those housing situations might be considered thriving. Changing direction, a positive outcome indicates progress toward the goal. A neutral might be stability or no change in status. Negative might be that situation's changed in the other direction for the worse. So, the 6 national goals. Remember, they were the foundation for the Community Action Network for 20 years, from 96 to 16. And while the goals on the 2017 National Theory of Change, we're going to use, they were changed, and that's what we're going to use for our framework of this discussion. And it's important to us to consider all levels as we think about the work of our network, particularly at the local agency level. Now, here's what I'm going to need some help. So I'm going to need some more readers. We got several pages of things to go through. So on page 37, examples of family outcomes. Low-income people become more self-sufficient is the way it's written. You might replace self-sufficient with the words economic security. The new theory of change uses, which is goal 1. Let me find it here. Right here. Individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security. Could someone read the right below where it says goal 1 and the little box starts with self-sufficiency is more?
Oh yeah, you just want the box read?
Yes, just the box, please.
Self-sufficiency is more than employment and employment-related activities. It can also include outcomes from support activities necessary for the movement towards self-sufficiency and the reduction and elimination of barriers preventing self-sufficiency.
So might be that, going through a few of these bullet points below it, might be that unemployed people obtain employment or self-employment or better employment. Could be that they obtained safe, adequate, affordable, unsubsidized, permanent housing. Could be that they increase their earning income. The next goal, goal 6, is what this one refers to. In the 6 national goals, low-income people, especially vulnerable populations, achieve their potential by strengthening family and other supportive systems. There is a broad range of outcomes that are achieved by persons or families who maintain a level of stability or well-being as a result of community action. Could someone read just a few of the bullet points below that one? Don't have to be all of them, just 2 or 3.
I'll read them.
Thank you.
Persons increased education or skills. Persons increased ability to manage income. Persons improved or maintained nutrition.
There you go. Thank you. So,
You know, for some of us, we don't realize what these things are saying, what they mean, because we're pretty self-sufficient. We're pretty, we're self-starters, we're whatever. But for some people, that's a major goal. That's a barrier to
it is.
people.
I have a question, and I feel like after working here for 10 years, I should probably know the answer. When we said our goal is for people to be self-sufficient, are we saying self-sufficient without assistance? Like, to get them then, is the long-term goal to get them off assistance? If they went from homeless to having housing, but they had HUD or some kind of assistance, like, is that the end of the goal, or is the end of the goal to then them keep building themselves up to where they're no longer needing government assistance in any way, or needing us?
I think eventually that would be the goal, is to get them completely self-sufficient.
So
Now,
we wouldn't say someone is self-sufficient until?
it might be that it takes generations.
It's an individual thing, because there are, it's a case by case, as self-sufficient as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if someone is still on food stamps, but they've obtained the goals of like the custody of their children, and they have housing, and they have a job, but they still have like.
It's a matter of, from when they come to us, improving, and they're what they're capable of.
Okay.
And now some clients, honestly, they can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
Some clients, their situation,
Yeah.
they're only going to be able to improve so much. But you help them achieve that maximum potential as best you can.
So it's going to be the individual definition of self-sufficiency,
It's
kind of the
it's
case
going to
by
be each
case.
individual. Yeah, moving forward is basically the way I would look at it. It's what steps can they take to get as far as they can.
Yeah.
And like as in with, say, Head Start, you may not see the results of that for a generation or two.
Well, like with our homemakers, like you may never see them stop getting assistance because they may have disabilities or something like that.
But I think that's where you look at, you meet each client where they are, and you evaluate what they're capable of.
Okay.
And some individuals that are homeless, they are capable of employment and an unsubsidized apartment, or maybe later buying a house.
Yeah.
Some, when you meet them, you realize their self-sufficiency is being in a HUD apartment and receiving food stamps and assistance.
Okay.
It's meeting each person where they are.
Okay.
Some of our programs,
I wasn't sure if there was just a black and white definition of self-sufficiency or
I don't
not.
think there is.
Okay.
because self-sufficiency in that term would mean that the homemaker program, they would never be self-sufficient.
Right.
And they are,
yeah.
because they're not going into public assistance to have to leave their homes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, moving on, getting back on here to page 38, so we have examples of agency outcomes. Can I have another volunteer to start there with partnerships and read down through the little block? You will? Thank you, Cassandra.
It is not the existence or counting of partnerships and collaborations, but the impact these arrangements have on clients and their communities.
Okay, that is under the partnerships among supporters and providers of services to low-income people are achieved. Over here on the 6 national goals, that's on goal 4, which is an agency goal. Agencies are formed or maintain partnerships and collaborations They improved community planning, and they were able to achieve specific outcomes. Agencies increased their capacity to achieve results. Goal 5. Agencies are well run and meet accepted standards of excellence, demonstrate continuous improvement and capacity to meet the needs of low-income individuals, families, and communities. A couple of bullet points there. Agency maintains sufficient discretionary funding to support unexpected and negative cash flow. Achieved accreditation demonstrating that our programs obtained a level of excellence or met or exceeded nationally recognized standards. While there is no agency level goal here on the theory of change, okay, we see the others, but we don't see an agency goal here. The removal was done based on the current understanding that performance management frameworks must identify what the agency produces outside of its own capacity and not on the agency capacity itself. However, agency capacity is identified in the performance management section and in the foundational statement, high performing agencies. So it's not eliminated, it's just found in a different way. So here's our foundational statement. Here's our performance management. So the agency works through these two sections on the theory of change. It's important for us to keep these agency goals in mind as we work to develop local theories of change, which will be part of subsequent Roma training. So there is a need for us to understand those agency level outcomes. Examples of agency outcomes include forming partnerships for specific kinds of outcomes. Not just counting the number of partnerships, but evaluating the results of forming those partnerships, which includes service delivery, coordination, improvement of program efficiency, elimination of duplicate services, improvements to community planning, and partnerships that support achievement of a specific family or community outcome. On page 39, we have examples of community outcomes, conditions in which low-income people live are improved, which is goal 2 here on the 6th National. Community outcomes are an integral part of community action and describe the allocation and focus of public and private resources for anti-poverty purposes, improvement in the community infrastructure, and creation of employment and other resources to support low-income people in their transition towards self-sufficiency. So low-income people have improved access to employment, housing, capital, and essential services. Can someone take goal 3 there, low-income people own a stake in their community?
Just the box?
Yeah, just do the box.
Okay. Community outcomes describe the participation of low-income people in community organizations and community activities, including volunteer and paid involvement. It includes business and home ownership, indicators of positive community change and stability.
So the number of low-income persons who participate in formal community organizations, government offices, community boards, or councils that provide input to decision-making and reflect the needs of low-income people was increased or maintained. The number and scope of opportunities for low-income people to participate in advocacy activities resulting in policy or program change was increased or maintained. So in the National Theory of Change, goals 2 and 3 have stayed. The wording's a little different between here and here, but they are essentially the same with similar intent and outcomes identified on there.
My honest question. When you were on the board, Southwestern, what population did you represent?
Government.
Government. Okay. Because they all have different, our board has different things, low income, government, business, legal.
We do need to hold this person on board.
So we have a little activity here. In the paper that I handed out earlier, it's got the national theory change on the front. On the third page, you should see the page titled, What is the Outcome? Thank you. We'll just go over a few of these real quick. Oh, I'm jumping the gun just a little bit here. I'm almost to that. So, comparison of family, agency, and community outcomes for employment. So we've previously identified needs to be assessed in 3 levels: family, agency, and community. So consider outcomes that are achieved in those same 3 levels in the employment domain below. While many social sector organizations help people find employment, community action agencies also create jobs, reduce barriers, leverage funds for training, and contribute to the overall economy and economic development of the community. Family employment outcomes address an individual's employment status, such as secured employment, whether it be full, part-time, or self-employment, improved earning income, they retain employment. An agency employment outcome can address the relationship of the agency with other government, community, and private sector organizations to provide additional resources and access to employment. Partnerships established with the public agency for job training, employment placement for low-income people, and agreements made with private corporations to place low-income people into those employment opportunities. Community employment outcomes can address factors that affect the ability to secure and maintain employment. New jobs were created in the community. Additional public transportation routes. I know that's come into play with some of the people at the homeless shelter at Mason County. They can get a job, they can't get there. Sometimes it's second shift childcare opportunities. So now we'll go to that handout. What is the outcome handout? So the first one here, we have a need. Individuals need transportation to get to work. That is our need. So how would we get to an outcome? An example is individuals acquire transportation. It's not the individuals get jobs, because that's an incorrect immediate outcome. Not individuals are provided with transportation, which is a service. Individuals need transportation to get to work. Individuals acquire transportation. That's our outcome. That's what we're trying to get to. We have our need on the board, which is families do not have safe and affordable housing. So our outcome is where we're trying to go to. There is not enough affordable housing in our community, is bullet point 3 there. So what would be the outcome? Any takers? The community increases its affordable housing units. Senior citizens in bullet 8 need housing repairs to stay in their homes. What is the outcome? Homes of senior citizens are repaired. That's our outcome. So what are our outcomes? So we have our need that we've identified in Module 2, which is families do not have safe and affordable housing. So how do we write an outcome statement that is going to meet that need? What is our end goal? How do we get there?
Families find safe and affordable housing.
I think that works. Let's write that out here. Thank you.
Or families secure or obtain.
Secure or obtain. I like obtain. So our outcome.
This is hard because my mind immediately goes to how they get there, not the outcome.
Right.
So I'm working through the steps of what they need to do.
Yeah. So we've identified our need, and we want to know our next step is we want to know where are we going. So
once you have those parts, then you get, okay, we know what the need is, we know where we want to go, then you figure out how to get there.
It's kind of like if you ever set personal goals for yourself, like,
You said
you know.
secure, right?
Obtain.
Obtain. Obtain.
you have to set the end result
Safe.
goal to determine what your steps are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of obvious, but
And
you gotta,
But it makes
You
sense
gotta
to
put it
like
in
lay it out
words
there,
and-
yeah.
gotta give yourself.
affordable.
It also helps probably keep you on track if you have your end goal in sight so that you don't veer off along the way.
So that is our outcome statement.
That's it.
So now we can place our outcome on our logic model. So I'm just going to make a big O. Jerry, do you mind to place this over there in column 3, please? And you'll see that Jerry's going to go up to our logic model. We've got our mission statement on the bottom. Column 1, we've got our need. Column 3, we now have our outcome. So, our key points from Module 3 are: it's important for the CSBG network to identify the results they will expect to achieve that will meet the community needs and will fulfill their mission. Identifying outcomes is the first step in strategic planning. Legislative guidance provides the mandate for agencies to do good planning, but planning is important because it is the right way to manage an agency. The Drucker Foundation Self-Assessment Workbook offers supporting information that can be used to reinforce the basic foundation of the Roma principles. Outcomes for community action are on 3 levels: family, agency, and community. Now, that wraps up part 1 of Module 3. So if you look back at page 31 again, you'll look at the last 4 learning objectives. We will understand the difference between outcomes and outputs. We will learn the difference between provision of services and strategic thinking as methods of identifying strategies for their agency. Understand proxy outcomes, which are outputs that stand in lieu of outcomes. Understand the importance of selecting strategies and services to be delivered by their agency that match identified needs, identified community needs, resources, and desired outcomes. And there's an additional objective to this one, which didn't make it into print in the book, which is we will consider the assumptions behind services and strategies. So I'm back on page 42 now, identifying strategies. So far we've seen how the agency's mission statement is the foundation on which all plans for the services have to be built. Actions must now be designed to meet specific needs identified on the family, agency, or community levels. The actions must be designed to meet specific outcomes you plan to achieve, matching the need, whether it's family, agency, or community. But what are these actions that the agency will plan to do? We've come to the time that the agency must select strategies to achieve the desired outcomes. The strategy can include a service or series of services, advocacy activities, or other actions. So consider the little cartoon here. It says we have to add some more detail to our plan. So the community action is get funds, abracadabra, presto, we've just reduced poverty.
That's the way it works.
Yeah. So they're telling us don't rely on magic to make our plan. We might have to start with knowledge of what we want to achieve, identify the resources we have or that we can get and bring to the project, and then lay it all out in the services, the strategies, the advocacy, and the other interventions. We need a rational way to identify the strategies and services. We want to think about our expected results first, and then decide what realistic actions we can take to get those results. How do we know if what we do supports the outcome we expect to achieve? We We have to make that connection. So over on page 43. So because we are results oriented, it's important we understand the importance of strategic thinking and select the services and activities that we're going to invest in. So I want you to consider the difference between simply providing services because funding's available, because we've always done those services, and working on long-term change. Some agencies move towards service provision as they got major funding from specific sources to focus on specific areas of need. Could be Head Start, weatherization, other areas, or as they got smaller grants that provided specialized services. We propose that the planning process of an agency must recognize that the choices that you make regarding the services you provide will reflect on the fundamental commitment of the agency toward a reduction or elimination of poverty. So over here on page 43, we're going to read this in a little different manner than you might expect. The first two paragraphs on the left under provision of services. Now this is what I would call a traditional service model. Can someone read those first two paragraphs starting with agencies that are, and in there with services and strategies?
Yeah, well, agencies that are organized to meet specific short-term services such as emergency services, transportation, weatherization, sometimes serve many customers. The challenge is being able to identify long-term change in the customer's lives. Providing services because funding is available can distract you from a more effective selection of services and strategies.
Thank you. Now, if we flip over to the other side, the right side of that column under strategic thinking, the way this is set up, it's a little unbalanced as far as the lineup there. The first two paragraphs on the left really relate over to the top paragraph on the right, which is on the strategic thinking model. What Thomas just read under the traditional service model or the provision of services, under the strategic thinking, it's the development of comprehensive strategies must include an understanding of the power of bundling services rather than providing services that meet an isolated need. So over under provision on the left, if someone could read it would be the third paragraph, failure to link.
I'll do it. Failure to link activities together to form a comprehensive set of services and advocacy strategies may reduce your effectiveness in assisting customers to move out of poverty.
And then under the strategic thinking model, the second one down goes along with that. It's agencies must find ways to identify the combination of services that are most effective for helping to change lives and support movement out of poverty. And then the last one on the left.
Sometimes there are unintended consequences of doing the same services you always have done, enabling the continuation of poverty.
And under the strategic thinking model, that goes along with, in addition to providing direct services, agencies must explore the impact of creating community engagement strategies, advocacy and policy change strategies, and other activities that are focused on reduction of poverty. That last bullet on the right, think of it more as a summary. It's agencies must strengthen partnerships to meet the needs that agency cannot address alone. Sometimes good services, say a food bank, emergency rent payments, can support individuals and families in a minimum way that actually prevents them from taking action. I think we've talked about some of this earlier today. So,
when we're talking about the affordable housing and things like that, we're talking about that next to the last paragraph there on the right. Policy changes that make it possible for us to move people into jobs, but to maintain that housing as long as they need it until they can keep moving up the ladder. And that's where we need to focus.
Yes.
And that would be a community, because you're looking at changing things on a larger scale.
Alright, so we have a little activity here, and I realize my handwriting is not the best, but so we have an example here, which is budget counseling to people who are deep in debt. So can we identify what is behind strategies here? What could we do here to provide budget counseling to people who are in debt? What about the cause? Well, let's change that a little bit. What about the causes and conditions of poverty identified in that statement?
Back of it, because I think you're confused.
Yeah, I think I confused myself a little bit there. Let's see here. Think about the causes and conditions of poverty identified in this statement and the outcomes expected. So, budget counseling to people who are in debt. Some of the things we might, people with low income who get into debt because they don't manage their money correctly.
Reasons.
Yeah, maybe.
Lost a job.
Yep.
Sometimes there's just not enough money to manage, so debt is a reality.
Yep. There's another example. This is a service, provide monthly food boxes. I think it might be, why would we do this? People need them. People may need a monthly food box. Are you aware that that's one of our services? It's run out of the homeless shelter. Might be that it's helpful to families who need food. Food boxes produce some outcome. Create a community coalition to work with employers who do not give jobs to local residents. So what are some of the things we may hear there? That maybe there are people in the community who have the skills, but the employers aren't hiring them.
It's a common thing in Mason County, but I don't necessarily know that there's unemployed people. I just know that in Mason County, a lot of our employees don't come from Mason County. They come from outside that county.
So they're driving in for those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our applicants even come from outside of Mason County.
Yeah.
But they're working in
They
Mason,
work
so I
in
don't
our
know.
county. Let me get back to my spot here. Might be that there's training for people who want to learn the skills. Maybe there are local people who want to apply. It says employers do not have access to qualified applicants from that community. Maybe they want to bring in their own people. So let's think about a scenario. Take that away. So we've just received a modest sum of money, our agency has, to address problems relating to food insecurity. What do we do? If we have a modest sum of money to address food insecurity, what would we do?
First thing I would do would be call the local food bank to see where we could help. See if there's a hole in the services that we could help fill.
Partner with the local food bank.
Because I wouldn't want to duplicate services.
Would you, I mean, I'm assuming that when you receive this funding, it comes with stipulations of where it's intended to be spent, correct?
Most often
Like,
they do.
this food is for this, and it can't be used for this, and
Well, it could be,
like,
I'm thinking, maybe you can use it for food, but not other types of products, or maybe people in a certain area, a geographical area possibly.
Right.
And sometimes they have income stipulations,
Right.
and sometimes they don't.
So, I mean, you first need to know what your guidelines were for
Right.
the money that you just received. We don't receive $1 million check with no stipulations or guidelines.
Right. But what are some other ideas we could do? So we're going to partner with the local food bank. Could we, I think the agency's doing one right now, leading up to Christmas.
Food drive.
A food drive. We could conduct a food drive.
I think.
That ends this week, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We would have to decide if we're going to spend the money to actually buy food, or would we provide vouchers?
Correct. So, decide
Because that's going to depend on how much space we have.
to
And then
purchase
how you're going to distribute it. Because that also,
food or purchase. Okay, that's wrong.
Provide vouchers.
Provide voucher. Thank you. There's that.
the next one was, how you're gonna distribute it. I don't know if you
Yeah.
have more or not.
Yeah, distribution. How do we distribute it?
And if we go with provide vouchers because we don't have space for storage, we're gonna deliver the vouchers, but then what if they don't have any transportation to go to the store and carry the groceries back and stuff? Do we need to coordinate something there?
And what employee is going to be over this?
That should be like your top.
Yeah.
To me, the top
Yeah, your
two
org
are
structure.
to me the top two are like understanding the stipulations and then who's the team lead.
Could be that we establish a skills development program, which would enable people with low income to learn how to purchase economical food and how to use it.
Oh, that was one of my favorite things in high school. Took a class, and we went to the grocery store because I went to Huntington East, and Big Bear was right across the street. And in our class, we went together and we learned like how to price compare and how to get your
Mhm.
best, for your
Best bang for your buck.
Yeah. We
I
really,
think I had a
I
similar
think
class.
a lot of people need that and need refreshers in that.
Maybe help organize, operate a farmer's market. Maybe help push for changes in expansion of the state and federal food stamp programs. And if you think about it, some of these are about providing direct services to individuals. Some are about the families, and some are about making changes in the community and the public.
In other words, give them fish or teach them how to fish.
Correct.
Well, depending on how much you got and what your stipulations are, like we could even open another food bank, but maybe it's not a free food bank. It's a lower priced food bank or whatever, to where they could come in and you could cover a lot of areas in that, because you could cover budgeting and shopping, and then in the end getting food for a lower cost, and
Yeah.
you've used that money to buy the food. I think we should do
So,
that.
that's all good work.
Somebody do that.
So now, considering, over on page 44, we're looking at our strategies now. So considering our needs identified, which is families do not have safe and affordable housing, and considering where we're trying to get to our outcome, which is to obtain safe and affordable housing, what can we do to achieve those? What services or activities can we do to provide, to get us from our need to our outcome? This is where we come back to, what are we going to do? That's our service. What do we do to help families obtain that safe and affordable outcome?
Link families to the affordable daycare.
Link families to affordable
Use our
daycare.
resources of what housing is available that they may not realize.
Link resources. What was that again, Michelle?
Use our resources to find out what's available to them.
Find out what resources are available all right. What else can we do to help families obtain that safe and affordable?
We can network with our own programs, like our weatherization programs. Maybe they have housing, but it's not safe or it's not affordable because the utilities are so high because they need weatherized.
Help repair with weatherization program.
And if we get enough money, we could just create housing. Thomas and I talked about that
I
before.
would say work with the local landlord association to address housing prices and discuss possible neighborhood action.
Is there a landlord association?
Work with landlords.
Work with the local city officials and police.
City officials. Work with local government.
Work with contractors.
Contractors.
We're gonna build an apartment complex and we're gonna house them. Right, Thomas?
Become landlords.
We wanna do that.
Right now, we're solving or hope to solve a Mason County problem, a real
Right, and
Real
a shelter, a
County
new shelter, yeah.
problem.
So if we look at these, out of all of these that we have here, what do you think is our best course of action? What would help us solve this need and get us to our outcome?
I think
I would
You
say having a meeting with landlords, local government, and contractors, and having a discussion to start out.
with the contractors.
I think that's the first step.
What I've heard is that there's not enough housing period up there, so we need.
Oh, in Mason County?
Well, and that's why I asked too, like whether it's housing assistance or the actual government housing like Markham Terrace and I can't remember the name of the one on 16th Street and stuff, like is it even there? Like are there vacancies and stuff? Because there's not in Mason, right?
From what I understand, there is housing, there is government housing there, but there's not enough of it.
So there's a
It's
lack of
full,
it for
yes.
there at Mason County.
That's my understanding.
So we're looking more towards helping them obtain safe affordable housing that maybe they don't currently have versus they have something that they have a home but it may not be in good shape or it may need repaired.
May even be relocation.
So let's think about that for a minute. How do we write how do we get our service?
Think in simple terms.
Very, very simple.
For the benefit of the exercise. Think in simple terms. What can we do to go from they do not have safe and affordable housing to obtaining it?
So increase in income?
Okay, so then we would have to do something to increase their income. Think in terms of possibly like, maybe we're helping them place them, maybe we're helping them with their initial rent and the deposit, and some of those barriers. What other barriers are there? What can we do to move them to?
So provide security deposits.
There you go. There you go. That's where we're trying to go to.
So we're trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to just do a home run. We have to think about it in terms of realistic steps.
Realistic small steps.
And see,
meaningful steps.
In reality, you're going to have multiple services, to help achieve this outcome. What we're doing here is we're doing this example model showing each piece rather simplistically. Because in a real world situation, yeah, we may provide rent deposits. Yes, we'll talk to the landlords and we'll get more information there.
Right.
And we'll address this not only from the family level, but possibly also from the community level. Is there actual housing out there? Do we need to work in the community level to provide more housing for them? We're working on the family level, to the family obtaining housing.
Yeah.
So for this exercise, we're going through the smaller
pay
pieces.
deposits, pay broker fees for low-income
Correct.
families.
It might be that we provide the assistance, the damage deposit or first month's rent.
Okay.
That might, because that would affect the family, because we have to work towards a family outcome here. So, let's see here. Provide first/last month rent. That might be our service. We're helping them get in the door to safe and affordable housing. All right. So what that does is that provides our service. So if I'm
You're going to have to keep me from focusing in on the big problem, the community problem.
right, yeah, you're looking at the community problem, and we're trying to build for the family right now.
Well, the
I mean,
community
it's all
problem
good for
affects
the
the
discussion.
family. It all goes together. Like,
It does, and
you're not necessarily. You can have people that are like, I don't need first and last month's rent if I can't find a place that doesn't have a dirt floor or working utilities.
Right.
So
yeah,
And
I mean,
see, and
your
that's,
situations are going to be different.
like I
across the
said,
board.
you're going to address the same need on multiple levels.
Right.
That's good that we can identify. Brent knows that I'm looking at this as a community big picture level, but he knows that,
And if we were in the situation, we'd be dealing with the big picture level, but we'd be handling the family that's sitting across the table from us. That's in your office.
you address it at multiple levels. You address, you identify, okay, there's the community need that there needs to be more housing.
Right.
There's the family need that we need to identify these barriers that are preventing us from getting into what's available.
Mhm.
That initial rent deposit or daycare, different things. And then you also have the agency. What are our needs? What do we need to improve so we can actually implement these programs and provide these services?
Community action not only we've become more service oriented.
Right.
Community action used to be very policy oriented. So while we would attack this with the deposit, we would also be using our legislative arm to educate policymakers about further things that need to be done. Which I guess we still have that policy arm because of this
With
national
the
community
national-
action. Yeah, but at the
national
state
list.
level, we don't do as much as I wish we
Yeah.
would.
But anyways, for the purpose of our discussion, and these are all good things, part of the discussion to get us from the community to the family. And it all works together. So now we've got our need, our outcome, and our service. And if you look over here at the logic model, you'll see that we built the first three columns out. Now, moving on the next page, we have on page 45, services and outputs. So, changes are the outcomes, services and outcomes here. The customer who participates in a training program, that's our service. The outcome is increase their skills. The customer who receives a utility payment, that's our service, will be able to avoid a utility shutoff. That's an outcome. The customer who gets a ride gains access to other services, our service. We're providing a service to services, and therefore and may therefore have improved health or other observable outcomes. That's our outcome. So when we talk about the process of the service, the quantity of the work produced by the service or other qualifiers regarding that service, we're talking about outputs. Output is a service. It's doing something. Outputs are the activities of the program, both the activities of us, the provider, or our partners, and the activities of our customers, our clients. Measuring outputs will provide data regarding the scope of the program, but it will not tell you what changes happened to that customer. Outputs are measured by such things as unit of service, number of people served, number of households or families served, amount of service received, whether it's hours, dollars, other measures, hours of participation, number of times in attendance. The most difficult elements appear to be the ones where customers are participating in a service, which is an output, but staff believe it demonstrates a change because the customer was not participating before. Think about identifying the customer participation as an output and the change or the outcome as something like improved mastery of the soft skills demonstrated by regular attendance and completion of the training. So this page here, it further identifies the difference between what we do and what happens to the people in our communities, our agencies that we serve. It's the actions we take or the actions that our participants take. Those are called outputs. I think this is where my flip chart might go. Basically, just a little visual reminder here that our output, that's our service, that's we're doing something. Our outcome is the change, that's where we accomplish something. So now we have a little activity we'll briefly go over on page 46, the outcomes and outputs. The statements contain both outcomes, or an OC, and outputs, which stands for output, OP, output. So if we take a look at the first one there, Adult Basic Education Program. Outreach and recruitment. What do you think that is? Is that an outcome or is that an output?
Output.
It is an output, correct. Enrolls in the Adult Basic Education class. Is that an outcome or an output? An output. On down there, achieves competency in basic math, reading, and writing skills. Is that an outcome or an output?
Outcome.
That's an outcome, correct. And receives certificate or diploma. That is an outcome. Y'all are grasping that concept. So in this example, receipt of a diploma as an outcome, that's a change. But some of the others are not as clear. For example, completing the class. Sometimes it might be considered an outcome because completion in itself is an accomplishment. You could say that. However, you also have to consider, did the participant who simply attended every class, which means they completed it, but did they not, then maybe they didn't gain any skill. Would that be considered an output? Remember, an outcome requires change. If the individual who completed but didn't make the academic gains may have made gains in development of soft skills, which would be the attendance, the participation, that could be stated as an outcome. But the change must be clearly explained and not left for the reader or for you to make assumptions when you're doing a report. Consider the difference between the completion of classes, which is about attending the sessions, and completion of an apprenticeship, where the mastery skill set is required. It's just a matter of clearly identifying what that change is. So if y'all don't mind, take just a moment or two to pick one of the other remaining blocks there. Just take a minute or two to do that for me. Is it an outcome or is it an output? Looks like we're doing pretty good at finishing up one of them here. Brent, would you care to read off one of them you did? Just tell me which block you did there.
I did weatherization.
Weatherization. All right, pick just a couple of them for us.
The gas consumption CCF decreased by 10%.
Is that an outcome or an output?
Outcome.
Correct.
Arrearage is eliminated. That's an outcome.
Perfect. Anybody else want to share with us?
I was doing the same one.
You are? All right, so Michelle's out.
I did emergency assistance and alleviated hunger.
Uh-huh.
Outcome.
Correct.
Prevented homelessness. Outcome. Obtained a bag of food would be output.
I'm trying to catch up here.
Oh,
You are correct on all three. All right, very good. That just gives you a little idea of, you know, the difference between outcomes and outputs. So if we flip over to page 47, proxy outcomes. So when an output stands in for an outcome, that's a proxy. And it's assumed to be an achievement of an outcome when you receive that service. Maybe it's something that it's kind of hard to quantify. So if a senior citizen receives a home delivered or a congregate meal, which is an output, you would assume that that person has reduced hunger, correct? That would be an outcome. Or might be an outcome of increased nutrition. It's really not realistic and practical to test to assure whether reduced hunger or increased nutrition has occurred. However, there is sufficient research data to support that those outcomes for people, for those eligible to participate in those meal programs. Therefore, a count of people receiving meals, not the number of meals provided, then becomes a proxy outcome for the real outcome of reduced hunger. There's enough data that says if we give you a meal, you're going to have reduced hunger. Research also tells us there are other outcomes associated with that home delivered meal program. They include increased safety, decreased isolation and depression, and maintaining their independence. It's not practical to expect a home delivered meal program to collect data on those outcomes. The count of the number of people who receive the meals can become a proxy for outcomes that cannot be realistically measured. In these cases, where research supports that causative relationship between a service and the outcome, the intervention, the activity, or service becomes the proxy outcome counted in place of. And you'll see on the logic model, there is a spot in the bottom right for a proxy outcome. And in this case, let me flip over here, find me a good spot. Yeah, I'll do it on that one. We need a little more room in here. Our room's not big enough, is it?
That's a need.
That's our need for our, that's an agency level, yeah. So here, do it on that one. So, number of meals equals output. Number of people reduced hunger. And the number of people received is the proxy. I think we've covered that. So, flipping over to 48. Use of proxy outcomes. An actual outcome supported by previous research, and it's not practical to measure or collected at each site. It's recognized and accepted. There are eligibility requirements for the participants who will yield the expected results. Another example of a proxy outcome is an after-school program. So if you provide an after-school program that includes a homework helper component, you should be able to identify an improvement in grades for student who attends. Sounds logical. Or an improvement in school behavior. Those would be measurable outcomes for the program. However, the research shows that after-school programs also impact reduced juvenile crime, reduced teen pregnancies, which are both considered negative behaviors. Those are the real outcomes, but local programs that you cannot document that you prevented something from happening. Therefore, measuring attendance and participation in those situations is considered an acceptable proxy for other outcomes. The number of students who attended the program could not be a proxy for the number of students who reduced that negative behavior. So many times, the services we call emergency or safety net services are thought of as proxies because providing those services reduces the emergency need, which is the outcome. However, there's no supporting research for that. So we talked about emergency services usually involving counting the outputs, say boxes or pounds of food distributed, but we really don't know if people actually have their emergency needs met. So no follow-up is usually done on those services to document those results. But it is assumed that if you get that box of food, you're going to eat it. There's been little research related to the value of distribution of food, and yet it is one of the most reported in the network. And we've already covered that we do provide that service here through the shelter. It's not acceptable for us to assume that outcomes occur as a result of the service. So service or outcomes, it's going to require a follow-up. Recipient of a food box decreases hunger or food insecurity. Receipt of a rent payment, maintenance of housing. Receipt of utility payment, maintain your utility service. Distribution of warm coats. Hey, individuals are warm, right? So in order for those services to produce proxy outcomes, some local follow-up needs to be developed that would document that those outcomes have occurred. In every one of those cases above, there are typically many other issues impacting the family that could prevent the outcome from occurring. The rent payment may not be sufficient to save the housing. The coat may not be enough to assure that the individual has appropriate winter clothing. Only after the actual outcome is documented and for a significant portion of the recipients can it be assumed that the service is a proxy for the majority of recipients. True research allows us to know what % of success is acceptable. So our key points in Module 3, as we finish up, is identifying strategies. It's not unusual for nonprofit agencies or community-based organizations to first go after funds such as grants and then figure out what we're going to do with it. This kind of arrangement has limitations as identified in the comparison between provision of services and the strategic thinking. appropriate management based on the Roma cycle using mission, needs assessment, identification of outcomes as driving forces in the selection of strategies and services. It is important for agencies to be able to document and report on the number of services they are providing to individuals and families on a number of strategies they are applying to the agency and the community level. And that concludes Module 3 and brings us to 4. I'll turn this back over to Jerry as I move around here.